You ever look at the US government and just think, wow, that is complicated? Well, you're not wrong, but all that complexity, it's there for a reason. See, the founding fathers had this huge challenge. They had to build a government strong enough to actually run a country, but not so strong that it could trample all over people's rights. So, how'd they do it? Let's dive into their brilliant and, yes, sometimes messy blueprint for power.
And this right here, this was the central question they were wrestling with. Remember, these guys had just broken away from a king. The absolute last thing they wanted was to create a new tyrant. So that fear of putting too much power into any one person's hands, it was real. Their solution wasn't to create one big center of power, but to deliberately split it into three separate and competing parts.
All right, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll dig into the why, that deep-seated fear of concentrated power. Then, we're going to meet the three main players, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. After that, we'll see how they're locked in this constant balancing act. And finally, we'll wrap up by asking the big question. Is this 250-year-old system actually still working the way it was supposed to?
Okay, so let's get right into the heart of the idea. You have to understand the Constitution isn't just a list of things the government can do. In a lot of ways, it's really a rule book for what it can't do. The founders had this incredibly clever insight. Instead of just hoping that powerful people would be angels, they designed a system where ambition would be forced to counteract ambition.
And their big solution came down to a simple number, 3. This wasn't just random, of course. It was a really strategic decision to split the essential jobs of any government into 3 co-equal branches.
And what are those 3 jobs? Well, they're actually pretty straightforward when you break it down. You have one branch to make the laws, another branch to enforce the laws, and a third branch to act as a referee and interpret the laws when there's a disagreement. Simple in theory, right? Okay, so let's break down who does what. First up, we've got the legislative branch. You probably know it as Congress. Now, this branch was specifically designed to be the closest to the people, the most direct voice of the citizens. Its main job? To turn what the people want into the actual laws of the land.
So Congress is bicameral, which is really just a fancy way of saying it has 2 parts. First, you've got the House of Representatives, where states with bigger populations get more representatives. And then you have the Senate, where every single state, no matter how big or small, gets exactly 2 senators. This whole setup, it was a massive compromise to balance the power between the big states and the small ones.
But here's the thing. Congress does a lot more than just write laws. It's also supposed to be a powerful watchdog. It controls all the government's money, it can completely reject a president's veto on a bill, and it even holds the ultimate power to impeach a president or a federal judge. I mean, these are huge checks to make sure the other 2 branches don't get out of line. All right, next up is the executive branch. If you think of Congress as the ones writing the country's playbook, then the executive branch is the team on the field, actually running the plays and making sure everyone's following the rules. And who's the head of this massive branch? The president, of course. The Constitution gives the president one primary job: to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, in practice, that means running the entire federal government, everything from the military and the FBI all the way down to the national parks and the post office. And the president has some really serious checks in their toolkit. The veto is probably the most famous one. It's a powerful no to any law Congress passes. But just as important is the power to appoint Supreme Court justices. I mean, think about that for a second. With just one appointment, a president can influence how our laws are interpreted for an entire generation. That's a huge deal. And finally, that brings us to the judicial branch. Now, this branch doesn't command an army, and it can't raise taxes. Its power comes from something else entirely. It's judgment. Its job is to interpret the law and act as the final guardian of the Constitution itself. At the very top, you have the Supreme Court. But really, the entire judicial system is designed to be the ultimate referee. So when Congress and the president can't agree on what a law means, or if somebody argues a new law violates the Constitution, the courts are the ones who step in to make the final call. And this brings us to the judiciary's biggest power of all, something called judicial review. It's a game changer. It means the courts can look at a law passed by Congress and signed by the president and say, nope, this violates the Constitution. It's void. It is the ultimate trump card that forces the other 2 branches to play by the rules. Okay, so we've met the players. Now let's see how this whole system actually works in practice. This isn't some neat and tidy process. It's designed to be a constant push and pull, a real tug of war. Let's walk through a quick example to see what that looks like.
Okay, so imagine Congress debates a new bill, and after a lot of back and forth, they pass it. But hold on, it's not a law just yet. First, it has to go to the president's desk, and the president can stop it cold with a single word, veto. That's check number one.
But that's not the end of the story, because the president's check can be checked right back if Congress can muster up a supermajority, and that means getting a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. They can override the president's veto and make it a law anyway. Now, it's a really high bar to clear, but it's a powerful countermove. But wait, there's still one final check in the system. So the law is on the books and being enforced, but now any citizen who thinks the law is unfair can challenge it in court. And if that case makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, the justices can strike the entire law down if they decide it violates the Constitution. So in the end, the judiciary often gets the final word. So what's the big takeaway here? Why should any of us care about this 250-year-old system that seems designed for gridlock? Well, because this constant tug of war is the basic operating system of American democracy. It's how it's supposed to work. You know, the point of this whole system was never to be fast. It was never to be efficient. The point was to be safe. By forcing the branches to constantly watch and limit each other, the founders tried to build a structure that made it nearly impossible for any one person or any one group to grab total control. It's slow and it's messy, but that's on purpose. Ultimately, this idea of separating powers isn't just some abstract concept from a history book. It's the real, practical mechanism that was designed to protect those core American values: freedom, justice, and equality for every single person. That's the promise, anyway. Which, of course, leaves us with a really big question for our own time. In today's fast-paced, deeply polarized world, is this old blueprint for balance still working? Or are the pressures of modern politics starting to crack its very foundation? Well, that's a question we all have to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.